Hi all, Wind here. So in today's video, I'm going to do a kind of best practices for troubleshooting incidents. Now, I do want to say that incidents can be very unique for each organization, especially it kind of has deciding factors that could change how you assess and how you resolve as well. But I'm hoping to provide some stages and phases to go through, essentially a structured approach to looking at or assessing incidents to get them either resolved as quick as possible to kind of tackle the low-hanging fruit, but also with the priority incidents to come in to get them to the right stages or the right assignment groups to get them looked at. So I'll go into a little bit more detail what I mean by that, but essentially I'm going to go to these phases and steps and what essentially I mean with each of these. So in this video, what we'll cover is incident triage and assessment, gathering the information, replicating and diagnosing the issue, identifying possible causes, applying known fixes or workarounds, testing and verifying that resolution, and then closing and documenting the incident. And lastly, essentially conducting a root cause analysis if needed. And we'll talk about where it essentially then moves into that problem management stage. So let's go back to the top to the first part, so incident triage and assessment. So essentially, first things first, whenever you are managing your queue as a system admin or as a developer that's supporting a level 2, we'll talk about that structure because it is different in every organization. But essentially, first things first is do check the priority, impact, and urgency. Ensure you are focusing on the ones that are highest priority first, so you can get them looked at and get them either deprioritized or kind of moved as quick as possible. Now, priority usually in ServiceNow, especially for incidents, are um, defined by two factors, or two fields, which is impact and urgency. So if the criticality of the affected service has a huge impact, then it would be high. If it's medium, it'd be low. And essentially, as you can see, as I move this over, priority will change. Priority is a combination of impact and urgency. Now, urgency is how urgent this is required to resolve it. Now, a lot of the users will always put one high, but I do want to show if the impact is low, which can be defined by us. And usually, best practice is to allow the user to define urgency, but as the technical resource, we define impact of that particular issue. So, as an example, I'm just going to reload this form for now, but I've created a few example incidents. Now, these are not real incidents, but there are some common incidents that I've seen in my experience. So essentially, I'll go through this one and then take a step back and go back to the article just to kind of show what I mean by looking at priority. But yeah, so as an example, mid servers are down. So no one discovered for the last 7 days. So just reading that and looking at that is quite a big issue. It is urgent by the user, as we can see, and this usually can be defined in the service catalog. Again, this depends on how which fields you provide and how you map them, but again, it's different for organizations and how you built it. But essentially, I personally, as a technical resource, if there has been no discovery for the last 7 days and mid servers down, I would first of all, of course, ask for evidence, and we'll look at the mid servers or our mid servers to see if they are essentially down as well. But essentially, I can see that this is quite an impact for incident. So essentially, change that impact to high because we do need to fix this right away if that is an issue. I'll just go back a little bit. So essentially, check the priority, check the impact and urgency, and review the incident description, category, and assignment group. So with this, essentially, just understand short description of what they're talking about, have a clear sense before you change the impact, the urgency, just really try and understand. And the big deciding factor actually is this a ServiceNow issue, because if it is not, then essentially, unless you are supporting multiple applications, but if you are a ServiceNow support team and it's not a ServiceNow issue, there's not much you can do rather than just assigning it to the correct group to look at it. So for example, of the incident that we looked at, if the mid servers are down, but essentially on our mid servers, we've checked the status of it. We've gone to mid servers and ServiceNow. seeing that they are actually operational and up, and we can see updates occurring, then it will be wise to ask what the external application is and assign this to the team to showcase proof of them actually sending successful transactions via the mid server. And it might be the integration at that point that is causing the issue, as an example. Um, and also just validate whether it's a new or recurring issue, because this could help save a lot of time. If it is a recurring issue, there might be knowledge articles or even root cause resolution notes that you could look at on previous incidents to either fix this very quickly, because it is predefined steps, and then look to create that into a common knowledge article for other your colleagues. But if it's a new issue, then you could essentially ensure that you're providing the steps clearly so that it can be created if it ever reoccurs, or can be looked at if it ever reoccurs. So that's what I mean by incident triage and assessment. And yeah, just a few things around that list for you. So essentially, I would suggest just categorizing by priority. So I'm looking at the ServiceNow one support team. That's where I am assigned to. I can see all of the tickets that are assigned to me, and essentially I will just kind of order it by priority, and then just look at the more critical ones first. And then the other, obviously, way to kind of manage your backlog is just maybe look at the newest ones or the oldest ones, and just try and tackle the ones that haven't been looked at as an example. So the oldest ones first. If priority is not, it is essentially the same. But yeah, just a few kind of techniques on how to manage your queue or backlog. Okay. And then we go to the next step. So let's say we've done all that and we understand that, we understand the impact, we agree with the impact and the urgency, and we agree with the description category. We don't need any further clarification, and it is a ServiceNow issue. We understand it is a new issue, so we don't need to look at any knowledge articles. What's the next step? So essentially, we review the incident details. So have a look at the caller, have a look at the affected service, the symptoms. So if the affected service is down itself, it might be that actually that might be the case to begin with, as an example. Nothing to do with the mid server. So just having a few checks of data we can see, checking the CIs. If discovery is enabled, you can see if there are any services or CIs within the application service that could be down, could be causing an issue, to then either create an incident task or reassign the incident to that team to just clarify if there's any issues, or just have a separate conversation with them. And then again, just looking at any past similar instance, and that helps with the triage above. If you know it's a recurring issue, then you could look at instance then. But if it's new issue, however, there's been similar instance, then you could also take a look at that. And then the most critical step, which will be the next step, is to replicate and diagnose the issue. So let's say you've gone through the above two steps and you haven't got anything that's helping you actually understand what the issue is, what the cause is, and how to resolve it. The first things first is to reproduce the issue. So essentially, if you do not have clear steps to replicate, ask the user for clear steps on how they've faced this issue, what exactly have they been doing, and then look to replicate it. Now, I always would suggest replicating in a subprod instance. You don't want to be creating records or anything in ServiceNow if you can, or ServiceNow production instance if you can avoid it. In the event that it can only be replicated on production, again, depends on your organization, but having a staging instance that's very closely cloned would be ideal. So you can essentially try and replicate the issue there. That's essentially it. And if you can't replicate the issue, just gathering those log screenshots or messages from the user is very helpful. And then just lastly, seeing if you could check the logs when you're replicating the issue to see if there's anything that's coming from that or the health dashboard. So it's essentially that step. And then once you've replicated it, at that point, it's then trying to identify what the cause is. So if you replicate it and you can see, so we'll go into the incident itself in a moment, but essentially then you're just trying to work out what's actually changed. So what's actually caused this? And once you find out what the issue is then just understanding if that was a recent change caused by a recent development story that's gone up, or has it been some integration that's recently changed something about the user record. So just identifying what's changed since this event has started. It might be that it's just always been there and it's now coming up, but essentially it's just trying to understand. And then you essentially just apply your known fixes or workarounds. So there's two things I would suggest here. We'll go through some examples so you can see exactly what I mean. But when we are talking about fixes, if let's say a recent change has gone in that's changed something around the ACL of a user and that's causing the issue, and as a result we need to fix it, then a story would need to be created. It is development work to do an ACL. So at that point, and it depends on your organization, but it could go to level 2 group, waiting on story development, or on hold, just waiting for that story development to occur. So the fix could be kind of next week. And if there is any workaround that allows the user to still achieve the functionality, then to provide that for the time being. So that's always a nice touch if there is a workaround possible, or it could be even just to ask them to raise a request to get them the report they need, and for the time being, and just communicate that with your service desk manager or group manager, and then allow you to essentially communicate once that fix is in, and then the workaround could cease to basically be used. So then test and verify the resolution. Now it obviously does depend on what the resolution is. So I think one thing I forgot to mention is step 5. So if you can apply known fixes, so if the issue is like a reporting issue, that can be done primarily on ServiceNow if it's just adding the right filters. So that could be done on production instance and then provided to the caller. At that point, just testing and verifying it works in production is great. If not, and it is as ACL fix or development story, then just testing and verifying that works in the instances, like your development instance, your test instance, is very crucial. And also just getting into that staging instance before release and confirm it's working there, as most likely the most closest to your production like instance. Right, and then essentially close and document the incident. So just update the work notes with your steps and your resolution notes. Very, very crucial to ensuring that you could always look back, or colleagues could look back as well. And if you do have the time, it's always nice to always create knowledge articles for anything that could be reoccurring, especially, and how to tackle that process. If it is a problem, and we'll go into that in the next step actually, and creating those problem records is really nice, so you can see which instance are essentially kind of children of those problems, and then just communicating with the user before closing the ticket, so using that additional work notes to inform them of the fix that it's in, and then essentially resolving and asking them to accept the resolution or reject depending, but essentially providing that information to them. And then essentially that's the incident resolved, and hopefully closed after 7 working days, depending on your organization, or if the user accepts the solution. So the last step, which is kind of if needed, but if the incident is recurring, then escalating to problem manager is a really good step. And this just allows you to kind of have children, or the kind of reoccurring instance, if there's more than one, create under that problem management, and having that assigned to a team that's looking at the root cause to try and fix this recurring issue. Even if the incident has been resolved, or maybe resolved as a workaround, it might be good to essentially be able to have that under a problem to fix this later down the line. So I hope those steps make sense. What we'll do is we'll just talk through some example incidents, and kind of understand how we would kind of diagnose the issue, what could be the possible causes, and possibly how you would go about fixing this. So I'm going to go back to my incident list. So I created a few incidents. So uh, let's go through them one by one. So essentially, first one's ServiceNow mid servers are down. So no discovery is updated for the last 7 days. Essentially, first things first. Just trying to understand. Um, can I actually confirm those details? So if I go into the ServiceNow mid servers and I check that they are up or down, now let's say they are down, then at that point there is a change that's required from our side or from the ServiceNow support team to be essentially testing that connection, understanding what the issues are, essentially making it operational. So at that point, this could be a level 2. It's not as simple as kind of fixing a report, as one of the examples we'll fix later. So at that point, I might say, okay, we are currently reviewing this, and I could assign this to a level 2 support team to get one of the ITOM developers to essentially take a look at it, or assign it to level 2 support team, even though I am still supporting this. This is kind of a more complex issue than most. So let's see, I've checked the mid servers, they are down, and I've essentially checked the logs of the mid servers, understand what the issue is, changed the required parameters, and then when it's back up, I will communicate that and then resolve or ask them to validate it, that they can see the changes on their side. Also check if now CIs are being updated, so it's a good way to check to verify that actually is now working before I then look to resolve this incident. Let's go with the other alternative. So let's now say that the mid server is actually still up. So at that point, I would identify that there is no issues on the ServiceNow side, and I would ask more questions and more verification from the caller. So try to ask what applications and services are they reporting from, which integration or which discovery tool is not working, and then either look to identify in the CMDB service to see if it's up or down as a service, or if it's up, then most likely reassign this to that discovery team to ask them to verify if there's any issues with their integration or discovery tool itself, or any responses, or when did it last start working, essentially. So there's a few steps here that you could do, and again, it depends on what answers you essentially get, which takes you down a different route. But hopefully that gives you an example how we can tackle a discovery issue. So that's one example. Let's go through the next one. Okay, so let's say workflow for change is not triggering correctly, so no approvals are being generated. So right now, looking at the short description, that gives us some idea of where the issue is. So we understand it's a change request, and we understand that approvals are not generating, but we could ask for some more information here. So essentially what we could ask is for them to provide us some example change requests that are currently not working, to understand what type of changes they are. So if they are standard or emergency as an example, or just normal changes. So just trying to isolate here what changes actually are not generating. Is it a global impact or not? And that would change the priority essentially. If it's just one specific type of change, i.e. a change for a specific group that's not causing a approval request, and it could be the group doesn't have any members, and that might be the quick fix, so that would really bring down the priority of that, because it's particularly one group that's mentioned. And also a very quick fix that could be done in ServiceNow, just adding those group members to it, and then essentially asking them to re-raise those changes, because those workflows will be stuck, they will need to be rerun, but that could be a quick fix. And that could be handled on the ServiceNow production. Adding group members to users is a simple admin kind of action to do. Now, the alternative is, let's say there is actually a issue with the change approval request where it's actually missing the approval flow for whatever reason. The approval activity is missing, or looking at an invalid group. at that point, development will be required. So at this point, I would say you would want to raise this to a level 2. If it is a global impact, having this as high is most likely a good idea. I would only say P1 is when the application literally is, if there is an outage to an application or process. Right now, this could be seen as a P2, though it's not working generations, generating approvals. The change requests are still being implemented. Again, it does depend on your organization on how you would like to prioritize this, but just for the sake, we'll keep it as a P2. So essentially, yeah, so at that point, you would create your story, assign this to maybe a level 2 support team, depending on how your organization teams are, and then develop that fix that workflow, ensure it works in a subprod instance, get that moved up to the stack, and then essentially communicate that once that change has gone up. Also, a few things to check to see. Possibly it could be because there have been a recent change to the workflow that's caused this issue. So it could be just rolling back to a recent version just to essentially provide a workaround. But whatever changes were there would need to be reapplied later down the line, but maybe fixed to not have this issue. So this could be one example of having this as a problem ticket, just to kind of ensure that a workaround was provided. We roll back the workflow or use the previous version. However, going forward, there will be a fix coming to fix this with the changes that we required with the recent change. So you might want to have this problem just in case any of them get affected again. Okay, so that was the workflow one. So another common one we always see, unable to log into ServiceNow. So essentially these ones, very simple check you could do. If a user can't log into ServiceNow, first things first is just check their user record. So if the user record is inactive or is locked out for any reason, that could be the issue. Now it does depend how your instance is set up. If these fields are being populated by SSO or AD essentially, then you might need to just reassign this instance to that team to get them to associate it, or just create a task for them or communicate that to get that resolved. If not, and you do manage that within your instance, you can essentially click these buttons, ask them to log in if that's fixed the issue, and essentially you're done. Now this could be a simple ticket, and therefore simple action, and can be done on ServiceNow production, so doesn't necessarily need any development. Okay, so that's a fairly quick one, and a lot of these P5 ones will be pretty simple as well, but I'll just go through them, just give a few more examples of how to tackle some of these common issues. So unable to export reports. Now this clearly is within ServiceNow, so there's no other team to actually look to escalate to. This is definitely a ServiceNow issue if users can't export reports within the platform, so they're unable to see the export button, CSV button on list view instance. So this is essentially just a list action that you could essentially check if the user can see. So first things first, just impersonate the user. So I would impersonate Alyssa, essentially check if they can export or cannot export, see if it works in a subprod, and you could also impersonate this one, especially in production, to see if they can export, because you're not actually doing the action. So as long as you're not doing the action, that's fine. But yeah, so you can just check if you can view that or not, if for whatever reason they cannot see it, it's just then looking at what changes has occurred to have caused that. So for list controls, you could essentially check if a property has been added or a role has been added to that list control for them to not be able to see it no more. And if that has been the case, then it might be a story to create to fix that going later down the line, because you do want to go through the right process with this one. If you do make the change of production, definitely I would ask to get confirmation from your team lead. But if you do that and it's a massive impact, essentially just a good kind of habit is to export that down the stack. so the systems are synced, because if not, any changes going forward that might touch that might just override it later down the line. And of course, if you do that, just communicate that with your developers beforehand. It's probably a good check just to see if that causes any issues for their development. But that's one example around exporting reports. The next one, the API not correctly triggering from Jira, so error responses is being provided by Jira. So this is a good check here to essentially, first of all, get those screenshots for those errors, try and understand what errors are essentially being put back to Jira. But essentially, you could also check the logs in ServiceNow to see what errors are being responded back. And if there is response, this one especially would require just working with the the external application support team, try and understand if they're using the right integration parameters or the credentials are correct. So with integrations, usually it's the credential that has an issue most of the time. So that'd probably be my first check with integration issues. Just check if the credentials are correct. They can actually access the instance and read, and if they can, then you will kind of go into the deep dive to understand if they're pushing something that is essentially being blocked by ServiceNow. I would also just try to pull back and just understand if they can just create a simple record instance, so rather than adding all parameters, can they just put in the mandatory fields and see if that works, and then just kind of build up the stages to understand where the issue really lies. Okay, and the last one we'll talk about today, so the reporting is not bringing back the right data. Now, this one especially is you can definitely do reports in ServiceNow production, or well, you can. There are some reports I would say you might want to just take it to some, for instance, if you're running a script on any of the condition fields. But with most of them, you can essentially just support these ones on the production instance. And with reports, it's always with this one, it's always understanding what the user's actually trying to retrieve in terms of data. A lot of the times we get issues with data not coming back right, but actually they're not using the right table, or they are misconfusing what fields would lie on what table, and actually they should be looking at somewhere else, or the data doesn't exist in that format. So just understanding for reporting issues anyway, what is the user trying to achieve here? Is that achievable in ServiceNow? And then essentially just guiding them on how they could do that. So one method I like to always do is just find the report they're working on and create a copy of that, and then work and show that solution working as to what we've discussed and what they've essentially informed me on. Based on that, see if that resolves the issue, and then once it does, you could essentially provide that report to them, so now they own that report, and they could essentially delete the old one, or you could ask them or guide them to make those changes on their original report. And again, that's just user training and educating them, so hopefully going forward it provides them with that element they can do it themselves. But yeah, that's essentially what I wanted to talk about, just giving a few tips on how to troubleshoot incidents. I hope that's helped. If there's any questions or you want me to do any further deep downs on anything, please let me know. I think just going through this was a lot, and there's a lot more I could cover, but kind of wanted to give a quick overview of how you could do it. And if there are any questions, please do comment them on the channel and on the video, and I'll be happy to reply as soon as I can. Thank you all. Bye.